You may remember when we had the tri-election just a couple of months ago now, but I was saying this, that if we could take all 3 seats from the Conservatives, they would be in a panic mode over the summer, the likes of which we have never seen. And they won 1 out of the 3. And as far as they were concerned, oh, well, that was good. And they did panic slightly, but they did not go into full panic mode. And this is why these 2 by-elections in Tamworth and Mid Bedfordshire are going to trigger a full-blown panic mode. This is going to set the proverbial cat amongst the pigeons. You saw a absolutely awful Tory conference where no one was enthused and no one came away believing that they could win when you had other people preparing essentially their next leadership pitch. You've got Liz Truss going to launch her own competing budget. Things are not good. We say this all the time, but things are really not good in the Conservative Party, and it is hilarious. It is a mess entirely of their own making. They entirely deserve the absolute loss that is about to be delivered to them, and losing these 2 by-elections in Tamworth and Mid Bedfordshire are going to cement this. Why? Because these 2 seats were strong Conservative majorities. And Labour has overturned those strong Conservative majorities with a swing of about 20%. That is the top story that will probably be running for most of the day. But I would not be surprised, because I'm doing this at watch is coming up to 11 o'clock, but it would not surprise me if we start to see, should we say, some serious coping coming out of the Conservative Party. And we're going to go over some of this that has come out in the last couple of minutes. So we're going to go over the BBC News, how they've been reporting this so far this morning and how it has broken, because they've got some quotes from some Conservatives. And to be honest, they ain't happy. They ain't happy at all. So before we do go into this sort of post victory, it's always worth reminding, general elections can always be their own beasts. That's proven so in the past. While these victories are very, very good, we should not get complacent. We should always be ready to prepare to fight a general election. And I do believe that probably Labour now, in the next 12 months, are in the best state to fight a general election. So the Conservatives are in no state to fight one at all, given the current state of their party. But hey, there you go. So, as always, before we go diving into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And, of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And, of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So, let's go on into this, with the BBC covering much of this news. So, this was one of the big comments you are seeing about this from the Conservatives. This is their current cope strategy. So they're going, oh, the only reason we lost was because low turnout and voters stayed at home. That's the only reason. So what was the turnout in Tamworth and Mid Bedfordshire? And what was, of course, the turnout in the constituency versus 2019? And it should always be remembered that by-elections always have lower turnouts. Always have lower turnouts. So what was the turnout? So in Tamworth, it was 36% turnout, this by-election. And in 2019, that was 64.3% voter turnout. So that was a general election versus a by-election. Again, turnouts always have historically lower voter turnouts. We've seen that play out time and time again. But it has proved that maybe one of the things that we have seen that has been the continuing story since the last May local elections is that the Conservatives are staying home. That in large proportions, they are staying home. And in some cases, they are switching to Labour or the Lib Dems. So, to be honest, this is good for us. This is good on a very good scale. Like I say, to get that type of defecting going on in a party and just people just staying home because they just can't bring themselves to vote for their own party, that's fantastic. Long may that continue. And then, of course, in Mid Bedfordshire, it had a 44% turnout compared to just 73% of that turnout. Most of you will have recognized this. There's a new update coming in. Most of you will have recognized this, that essentially what it looks like is that about half of the voting, that half of the voting people who normally turn out to vote turned out to vote. That's what that seems to me. Because if you look, Mid Bedfordshire was 44-73. That's roughly about half. In Tamworth, it was 36-64. Again, that's roughly about half. But if over half of your constituents are turning out and are delivering a 20% swing towards Labour, that's not good news. That is not good news to your Conservative Party at all. So this idea that they are trying to sell, or the cope idea that they are trying to sell, especially in the light of this morning, which we're going to see probably a bit more of soon, it had nothing to do with turnout. Just because you had a low turnout does not excuse the fact that these two majorities were massively overturned. This is the other interesting one. Did these smaller parties help Labour win? This is an interesting question that would be interesting to see if this really did play out. Now, we've said before that in Uxbridge, when we had that by-election, certainly if the Greens and the Lib Dems had gone and voted for Labour, remember, that was only 400 votes in that, they would have won. But in here, you have an independent candidate running in Mid Bedfordshire who got over 1,868 votes. And then you had a guy from Reform UK who got 1,487 votes, both ending in the 4th and 5th place. And Labour's majority here was over 1,192. So, as they say here, it could be argued that if either of those two hadn't stood, then perhaps those votes might have been enough for a Conservative hold. That is probably quite arguable. Certainly with Reform UK, that's arguable. I would say that would certainly be the case. The independent candidate, I don't really know what he was standing for. Don't know really what his views were. Who knows where he was sort of pulling his votes from. But that is arguable. If there is one point the Conservatives can make about the Mid Bedfordshire, it was certainly that these two smaller parties had taken probably votes away from them. We can't say it for 100% sure. Certainly Reform UK, we can say that. Maybe not for the independent, because again, I can't say where he was sort of standing politically. But that does seem to be a very good indicator. And now we get on to some Tory cope posting. So, Gillian Keegan came out and said that by-elections are always tricky for the serving governments, but on the doorsteps, very few people were switching to Labour. There was, quote, no real love for Labour. She added that the government has to deliver on its key priorities to demonstrate to the Tory voters who stayed at home that it's worth them turning out. Really? So, first of all, quote, no real love for Labour. Why then was there a 20% swing, the highest in these seats since the Second World War? Because that's the other thing they're going with. Oh, there's no real groundswell for Labour. That's just nonsense. Really? 20% swing. That's not nothing. But hey, we'll let them cope. So this is some of the interesting ones. So in Tamworth, Sarah Edward, who won, said a lot of voters had switched to Labour for the very first time. That's not, again, not surprising, but again, counters what Gillian Keegan has said, just what we've heard up there. Again, so yeah, Labour's Sarah Edwards, that's the Tamworth, overturned a majority over 19,000. It is the second biggest swing from the Conservatives to Labour since World War II. Again, not surprising. Tory reacts. Conservatives have tried to portray the by-elections as just midterm blips, exaggerated by difficulties surrounding the previous MPs. Again, Chris Pincher and, Nadine Dorries. Again, it's an excuse, but it can be a pretty valid one. But also, I think it says to your larger party that they're still not prepared to stick with your party, even though that terrible candidate has gone. It's more cope posting. And of course, the Tory chairman, Greg Hands, the guy who has been responsible for running these not only local elections, by-elections, and of course, eventually the general election. This is what he had to say. He said the results were disappointing, but the biggest problem was Conservative voters staying at home. And they weren't people necessarily energized by Labour. Why the big swing? If if these people weren't energized by Labour, why the big swing? Why the biggest swing since the Second World War? And of course, Professor Sir John Curtis, again, the big election guru everyone goes to, here's what he had to say. He said the two results were extremely bad news for the Conservatives, and it shows they are in deep trouble, but says we cannot presume that Conservatives would do so badly if there were a general election anytime soon. I disagree with that, but hey, there you go. But Rishi Sunak needs to deliver a dynamic reversal of public mood. Not likely anytime soon. I highly doubt he is going to achieve that. And then, of course, this gets funny because Gorge Osborn comes out of the woodwork. Gorge Osborn coming out of nowhere and says this. He says that the party is having for a heavy defeat of electoral Armageddon. And says that there's going to be a general election due in the next 12 months or so. That's even worse news. Whenever your ex-chancellor, Gorge Osborn, comes out and says, yeah, we're heading for electoral Armageddon, that's not good news. That is not good news at all. And of course, Fabricant comes out. More Tory action coming in on Twitter. Conservative Michael Fabricant sends his congratulations to his new Staffordshire MP Sarah Edwards, even as Alistair Stradwell mid Bedfordshire. But like other Tories this morning, he has also blamed the low turnout, saying that it meant there was, quote, little evidence of Conservative voters switching to Labour, unlike under Blair. HMG must do better, he added. Cope. Seethe and cope harder, my Tories, because I'm just going to drink it all in. But once again, if there is, quote, little evidence of Conservative voters switching to Labour, Why the 20% swing? That did not come out of nowhere. You know? This just did not come out of nowhere. And then, of course, Greg Hands again. So Greg Hands comes out and says that these are legacy issues from the chaotic end of Liz Truss and Boris Johnson's terms as Prime Minister, and they were to blame for last night's by-election defeats. It's been over a year. It's been over a year. Sunak has not turned the ship around. That's what he was elected to do. That's why he was brought in, to try and turn things around. He has not done that. Not only that, he's been implicated quite a bit in the recent COVID inquiry, nicknamed Dr. Death. We'll be getting on that later. He has reiterated that the results are due to disillusioned Conservatives' vote based staying at home. He pointed out that Labour, despite winning, made limited gains in actual votes cast, and it wasn't like Tony Blair when people were switching to Labour with any degree of enthusiasm, he added. These by-elections are about legacy issues, Mr. Hand said. Whether the next general election will be a real test for the Prime Minister and will be contested on giving a full term to Rishi Sunak. Really? Why on earth would we want to give a full term to Rishi Sunak? He hasn't exactly wowed anyone. And bear in mind, he's almost had a year in office at this point. What's he actually achieved in a year? Well, he signed the Windsor Framework, which sort of sorted out the mess of the Northern Ireland Protocol that Boris Johnson had left, but it also didn't get the DUP back into governing in Stormont. And of course, it has its own issues that we've talked about before, which we won't go into here, but we've talked about before on this channel. Like I say, you can go look him up. And then, of course, what other things has he done? Oh, that's right. Cancelled HS2, one of the biggest infrastructure projects in the world, hosted one of the most disastrous Tory conferences in the world, has U-turned completely on all the UK's net zero promises. He's not inspiring anyone either, Mr. Hands. he is not going to get a full term, I think, at all. And to be honest, good. Starmer, we're not going to get carried away. That's fine. Starmer, history in the making. Taking the victory humbly. They've made history here. No one in mid Bedfordshire will ever take Labour for granted again, says new MP. I like this. Voter who switched from Conservatives says change was the only option. Remember, we've just had three Conservatives saying, yeah, this isn't happening. It's just they're staying home. Let's see what he had to say. So, this is what this voter who had to say. He said, I felt my only option was to vote Labour. I've historically been a Conservative voter, but I felt they didn't warrant to have my vote. He told me that the Conservatives have let us down. He points to the new housing being built, which he says that without the infrastructure to back it up, his example has been that it's not been able to get to a dentist appointment for over a year, and the local post office is shut. What have we said about infrastructure recently with the £30 billion suggestion that has been put forward by the body that is meant to say, hey, government, you want to do this in infrastructure? Well, you need to spend this amount. What, have they done anything about that report? No. They've just gone, oh, okay. It's exactly what I said would probably happen. Another voter. He's changed from the Conservatives to Lib Dems, and he said the Conservatives have got what they deserved, said the healthcare worker. He tells me that the biggest issue for many will have been Nadine Dorris's situation. But when it comes to a general election, he is undecided on where his vote will go. Let's see what happens, he says. Okay, that's fine. But I very much doubt it's going to go that way. I very, very much doubt it is going to go that way. I very much doubt this guy in a general election is going to go and vote with the Conservatives again. Neither is this guy either. Here it is, Professor John Curtis, one of the worst nights any government has ever endured. The results from Tamworth and Bedfordshire represent one of the worst by-election nights of any government has ever had to endure. These are the disturbing echoes of the Conservatives in the results of by-elections in the Parliament of 92 to 97, at the end of which the party crashed to defeat. In the last 3 years of the Parliament, there were 4 by-elections, which was a swing by more than 20% from Conservative to Labour. Now we have had 3 in just 3 months. Of course, swings against the government are often an exaggerated reflection of the current national mood. Indeed, a swing in both by-elections was rather less than the 14 or 15-point swing currently being registered by the national polls. Yep. Not surprising. And of course, here we've got some more Tory MPs calling for changes. John Redwood has said that the low turnouts in by-elections can produce big swings. And it shows that, quote, people want something better than the main parties are offering. You are part of one of those big parties, John. You should be offering people more, but you're not. Many people want the government to stop the boats, improve the quality and efficiency of services, and cut tax to get some growth. How? How can you say you want to improve the quality of services, but also, yeah, we want to cut tax? How then do you fund those services if you're going to cut taxes? Oh, John. Again, this ludicrous free market fundamentalist ideology strikes again. Dame Andrea Jenkins highlights the, quote, voter apathy and calls for far-reaching major changes now to instill confidence in the Conservative voters. Again, doubt that's going to happen because they're all going to be fighting about which direction they should go in. It ain't going to happen. Quotes of the night. Yep, just again, more coping about people staying at home. It's like switching from Tesco to Aldi. Voters in Mid-Bedfordshire should react. Flintwick in Bedfordshire constituents say they are shocked to see Labour take Mid-Bedfordshire seat. This one saying being Conservative area is quite a shock. He told me that based on the conversation that he's had and what he's read throughout, the Liberal Democrats might take the seat instead. But on Labour wins, he says it's like Tesco and everyone changing to Aldi. We'll all just have to wait and see. Meanwhile, someone else says it's about time we had a difference around here upon hearing the news. She says, given the big campaign by Labour, she would have been surprised if East Alpha had not won. Speaking of which, she wants a new MP to work on. She says, I want a better infrastructure in towns, especially in our town, because it's expanded so much that our schools, doctors, dentists, and everything is really under strain. Infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. It's a good thing to build. It's what the Tories haven't been building for over 13 plus years at this point. But I think you get the picture. Again, someone else here, one of the worst Tory nights of by-elections ever. Starmer heading to Mid-Bedfordshire. There we go. So, yeah, you can see, all in all, it has been an absolutely terrible night. An absolutely terrible night for the Tories. And oh boy, you know what comes next. You know what comes next. The coping, the seething, the blogs. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. And hopefully infighting. Lots and lots of juicy infighting. because, oh boy, you know, anything that can kickstart this Tory civil war early, well, that's just music to my ears. So, as always, we'll bring you the best of the the Tory coping, as always. So remember to click the subscribe button and also the like and share button on your way out. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee. Wake you well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.